I'm Abreu and I support carbon pricing.
I'm Wudrick and I don't support carbon taxes.
There you go.
Well, I don't support carbon taxes. I think that there's an affordability issue in this country for a lot of Canadians already, and carbon taxes just add to that pile. And when we talk about climate change generally, we are, as everybody knows, talking about a global problem, and I think a lot of Canadians struggle to ask why they should be asked to make a greater sacrifice than a lot of other people are making. So I think that carbon taxes mean well, there's an important issue at stake, but in terms of being a tool to really deal with the problem, a carbon tax in Canada is not something that's going to have as much of an impact as people would hope. What are your thoughts on carbon taxes?
Well, I think it's pretty clear when we've heard from Canadian scientists that Canada is warming at twice the average global rate, that climate change is real, it's hitting Canadians hard, and we're seeing really dramatic effects elsewhere in the world. The Arctic is on fire, the Amazon is on fire. We're in a climate emergency, and we need to use every single tool in our toolbox to address that emergency. And carbon pricing is one of those tools, and I'm not ready to leave it behind.
Oh, fair enough. So I guess the question I have is, because we're talking about a global issue, and we're talking about how Canada plays its part as part of that global response, right? I think everyone agrees. I think the Prime Minister himself has said that Canada acting on our own, if nobody else acts, it essentially boils down to a symbolic act. We hear often that the idea that Canada can show leadership, right? I guess the challenge for people like me is to see how our actions are going to inspire, say, a country like China or Russia, whom we have difficulty sort of convincing on anything these days. Is the idea that us taking a step and showing leadership, is that really going to motivate any of them to change their own behavior?
That's a great question. So I think first important to dispel this myth that Canada is not a part of the problem. We've been one of the top 10 net emitters of greenhouse gas emissions for the last century. We've never moved out of that top 10 position. And when it comes to per capita emissions, Canadians really emit more than pretty much anyone anywhere else in the world. So we are part of the problem, and as one of the world's wealthiest nations, with a ton of resources, both financial and political, I think we must necessarily be a part of the solution. Can we do it alone? No, we absolutely can't do it alone. It is necessary that we do this with a collective effort. It's a global problem requiring a global response. But I always say, Aaron, even as an only child, I know that if I'm going to be asking one of my siblings to clean up their room and I'm not cleaning up my own, how do I have the right to expect that of them? So Canada can't really expect other countries to act if we're not willing to step up to the plate.
Yeah, I mean, but I see it as a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, right? I understand the argument that says, well, if everybody says you go first, right? But the challenge, again, from a Canadian standpoint is maybe Canadians are prepared to make a sacrifice in service of an important cause. I think it's harder to sell it to them if they don't have a lot of assurance that it's going to be for something, right? When you make a sacrifice, you want to see, well, what's the trade-off, right? And you mentioned that we're a wealthy country, we have a lot of resources. That implies it's going to cost money, and I think people need to be honest about the fact this is not going to be a cheap endeavor to fight this. There are more expensive or cheaper ways to fight it, but there is a cost involved, and I think the problem we face with some of our politicians is they're glossing over that cost. I think a lot of people find it a little too good to be true, for example, that, oh, we're going to have a carbon tax, but you're going to have more money. What's the downside? What's not to like? So I think maybe a little more hard talk might actually go a long way rather than sort of glossing over the cost.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's necessary on both sides of the equation. We need to be real about what the costs of fighting climate change are, and we need to be real about what the costs of not fighting climate change are. We are already seeing an increase at the tune of billions of dollars in insurance claims in Canada because of catastrophic weather events, whether that's flooding or fires. The costs of inaction on climate change are already huge and they're growing. So I think being real about the costs on both sides of the equation is really necessary.
Yeah.